Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual launch of the NEL Prescribing Quality and Efficiency Scheme for this financial year. My name is Catty. I'm a Senior Medicines Optimization Pharmacist and part of the NEL Pharmacy and Medicines Optimization team. I'm also joined today by my colleagues Rosalia, who's the Deputy Director of Medicines Management, Yaz, who is the Lead Medicines Optimization Pharmacist, and Imran, who is the Lead Medicines Optimization Pharmacist also. So we welcome you to today's webinar, which will provide an overview of the scheme and equip your practice to deliver the requirements of the scheme. So before we start, just to run through some webinar housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded, so we ask that everyone keeps themselves on mute, please, and to pop your questions that you may have into the chat. We hope to have about 15 minutes at the end to answer any questions. After today's webinar, we will circulate the slides, provide a link to the recording, and pull together an FAQ document from all the questions raised today. Please note, we've got quite a bit of content to go through. So this webinar is strictly for to discuss the new scheme. So any pre-existing questions about pre-existing schemes, please can this be referred to your place-based teams. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Rosalia, who will provide some background on the scheme.
Thank you, Catty. And yes, thank you very much. So my name is Rosalia Ainty. I'm one of the Deputy Directors for Medicines Optimization in the Pharmacy and Medicines Optimization team in the NEL ICB. So I'm here today to give some context to our Prescribing Quality Efficiency Scheme for 23-24. Some of you might recognize names such as Prescribing LISs and LESs and Medicines Optimization Schemes and Prescribing Incentive Schemes. So for the newly formed NEL ICB, the scheme that we're running with this year, we've called the Prescribing Quality and Efficiency Scheme. So I know this has been anticipated for a few months, and really happy to announce that we now have one prescribing scheme across each of the 7 boroughs across the NEL footprint. The aims of the scheme, as similar with previous years, is to focus our attention and our resources to addressing national and local priorities in terms of medicines optimization. So when I say we, us as the NEL ICB medicines optimization team, but also our practices and PCNs and other prescribers. Also, from feedback that I've had with lots of other practices, I know that often the content of our prescribing schemes provides really good evidence for practices to showcase the CQC as having good medicines optimization processes with relation to, in particular, CQC Regulation 12. So the schemes in this hopefully will help practices to support national asks, NEL asks, as well as provide you with good evidence for CQC inspections. Broadly speaking, the scheme is split into 2 sections. The first focuses on quality and safe prescribing, that's the Prescribing Quality Scheme. And the second part focuses on cost efficiency of prescribing, and that's the Prescribing Efficiency Scheme. The schemes are linked, so practices signing up to this are signing up to delivering the asks within Section 1 as well as the asks in Section 2. And each of the sections have remuneration that is linked to it as well. And we'll discuss that in more detail later. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the scheme would be across each of the 7 boroughs in North East London. It runs from September to March, which is about 3 months later than typically we would have launched previous prescribing incentive schemes or prescribing LISs. This reflects organisational change across North East London and other ICBs, of course, which has meant that there are changes in the way that governance arrangements and sign-offs and agreements from finance run. So this is a reflection of quite a lot of changes we've seen across the ICB and ICS footprint. However, I want to assure you all that the shorter time period to complete this work, we have taken into consideration the content and the workload. And in all our discussion with stakeholders, we have taken on board around workload. And when Catty discusses the section later on, she will outline some of the changes that we have made to accommodate this time period. I also want to highlight that we've involved quite a diverse range of stakeholders in this. So we've had discussions with the North East London LMCs, with the primary care leadership teams, with clinical leads across PCNs, as well as boroughs, and also with finance too. One of our asks is that practices please complete the web form by end of this month to confirm their sign up to the scheme. The web form will be in the chat shortly. So please do keep your chat open because we'll share some of the links to complete this. Next slide, please. I also wanted to raise quite an important point that we need to focus on, and that's looking at our financial position. So for 23-24, the financial year that we're in, as of June end, because the NHS SA data runs 2 months late, so we've got June data, the first 3 months. Against our budget of £237 million, we're forecast to spend by the end of March next year, £261 million. So this represents an almost £24 million overspend on our prescribing budgets. We do identify that there is increased prescribing, both in activity, so we're prescribing more. This accounts for approximately 5 million, that we're often prescribing things which are much more costly because of the new drugs coming on board, because of pricing strategies, etc. And this represents £9.5 million for us in North East London. But despite those two factors, we still have a savings gap of about £9 million. So we're in quite a bit of a challenging position. When I say we, I mean the ICB, ICS across North East London, to be able to identify and deliver further savings from the prescribing budgets. Next slide, please. So the targets that we had for this year across North East London ICB in terms of prescribing savings was £17 million. As a pharmacy and medicines optimization team, we've identified about £8 million of savings across 24 different prescribing areas. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, we still have about £9 million of savings to be made. So I really have a desperate ask for all of you attending from PCNs and practices that you work with us to try and implement prescribing recommendations that will help to deliver prescribing savings. We urge you also to utilise the newly agreed Optimise RX. I know Optimise RX was used by one borough in North East London, but it is fairly new to some of the other boroughs who were using Script Switch. So we really recommend that you utilise Optimise RX. If you haven't heard of this or not using this, please do use our generic contact email to let us know if there are any issues. There is also a feedback mechanism within Optimise RX, and to be able to feedback on any messages that you have concerns about, etc. But what we do ask is please do utilize Optimizer RX in your when prescribing. And then we would urge you to also look at reducing medicines wastage. So any prescribing practices, from ordering to prescribing to dispensing, to look at ways in which we can reduce our medicines wastage. But then also finally, if you've got any recommendations to us about areas that you think we can make savings on, be they on any pharmaceutical products or appliances or manner in which people prescribe, dispense, order medicines, we would urge you to give us some feedback with your recommendations. And in the chat will be a link to which you can do that. You can either may wish to use that during this webinar, or you can feedback to us later on. But just urge everyone to input into this, even if you think it's an area that we might be dealing with already or somebody else might mention it. We'll really urge you to try and give us some feedback on the areas that we can target, especially as you're all on the coal face of prescribing and seeing patients. So that's the end of my introduction. Thank you very much for making the time to be here today. And I'll pass over to Dr. Fofonso. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Wanda Fofonso. I'm a GP in Hackney, sitting Hackney, prescribing lead of place. So I've been asked to speak really briefly on the benefits of the prescribing incentive scheme, and this from a clinical or GP perspective. And I've got about 2 or 3 slides just to share some thoughts on this. So I think I'll first of all start off by saying that I'm really pleased that to note that we are carrying on with the prescribing incentive scheme. As I know, some colleagues and practices have been wondering and anxious even, given the move to integrated care systems and the changing landscape, about whether or not this would go. And a couple of people.
Dr. Fafunso, I'm sorry to interrupt. Some of the.
I'm just going to take over until Dr. Fafunso starts to come back. So good afternoon. So for those who don't know me, my name is Yasmin and I'm going to outline the scheme today. One of the asks that we have requested from everyone is that we would like confirmation that practices will be taking part in the scheme this year. And you can do this by completing the electronic form which Katy has put in the chat. So you could do that now. So the scheme, as Rosalie has stated, that there are two sections to the scheme and both parts run from September to the end of March. And the scheme contains a mix of both indicator-based activities where you don't need to submit any evidence of work and really just about trying to maintain or reach a specific target, and also activities where you are required to submit some evidence of work, such as, for example, from the clinical areas. However, we have tried to simplify as much as possible all the submissions to make it easier and to reflect the shorter period that this scheme is going to be running from. So in regards to the scheme, there are going to be 5 parts to it. So part A really just formalizes some of the activities that we've previously done with practices, and that includes things like having a prescribing visit with your advisor, sort of engaging in health campaigns and continuing to have and engage with community pharmacy. The second part, or part B, will focus on the use of the optimized RX platform, which Rosalie has talked about. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in this further on. Part C is looking at the clinical areas of reviews. And as always, we always have an education element. So that's part D. And then part E is the medication safety work. So we, practices have been doing a lot of this work already, and it's really just to continue engaging practices in that. So for this part of the scheme, practices will be remunerated at 54p per registered patient, and we are going to be providing tools and resources and templates to support the scheme, and they will be available on our new portal, and the link is in there, and Katy is also going to be putting the link in the scheme in the chat. Please bear with us. We will be so not all of the final documents are on right now, but they will be by the end of this week. Okay, now I think Dr. Fafunso has come back, so I'm just going to hand you over and then I'll continue. Thank you.
Hi, is this much better? Can everyone hear me?
That is clearer, Dr. Fafunso, thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. It always tends to happen when you're right in the middle of things. Okay, so if we could, right, we're back on my slide. So I started off by introducing myself. I'm Wande Fafunso. I'm a GP in City and Hackney. I'm prescribing lead at Place. And I've been asked to speak really briefly on the benefits of the scheme from a clinical or GP perspective. So I've got about 2 or 3 slides to just share some thoughts with you about this. So I think I'd first of all like to start off by saying that I'm quite happy that the scheme is carrying on. As I was saying earlier, some people within my patch have been quite anxious and wondering whether or not the prescribing scheme would go on, especially with the move to the integrated care systems and the changing landscape. And I don't think this was necessarily just because the scheme is incentivized, but the prescribing incentive scheme has generally helped practices to focus on local and national guidance and targets, certainly from a prescribing perspective, and I can attest to that in my practice. So what are the benefits of the scheme? Obviously, it provides good evidence to the CQC of good medicines management processes. Now, we know the learning from patient safety events does encourage active reporting to enable system-wide learning. The sodium valproate MHRA alert also continues to be a national priority. Now, the regulatory measures and the guidance for that, I believe, were first announced back in, I think, 2018, following a large-scale review of risk And of course, it continues to be a national priority. The clinical reviews and audits that we do, last but not the least, which as we know are an integral component of clinical governance. They do help with the development of practice-wide action plans and shared learning. And I can give a personal example of this when we had our CQC visit back in, I think it was 2018. And one of the audits as part of the scheme at that point was the AF audit, I remember quite well. And we had shared with them, how this had improved practice within the practice, and they were quite pleased and impressed with that. So the other thing I wanted to say as well was that, of course, we do know that these audits and clinical reviews and the implementation thereof also demonstrate to the CQC an awareness of an engagement with and an adherence to clinical and safety standards. So it's quite important when we do that, and that's one of the benefits of the scheme. It also does enable us to fulfill national and local medicines optimization priorities and guidance. So we do know, for example, that antimicrobial stewardship continues to be of topical importance. And you might be aware also of the recent guidance or proposal recommending not to prescribe antibiotics for suspected acute respiratory infections, just based on remote consultation only. And of course, there's now the move towards 5-day prescriptions of antibiotics for common antimicrobials, such as amoxicillin. Of course, this also helps us to ensure that our prescribing aligns with NICE recommendations. And an example of this here would be the SGLT2 inhibitors clinical review. As we know, SGLT2Is improve cardiovascular outcomes in adults with type 2 diabetes and chronic heart failure, or those with established atherosclerotic disease. It also reduces the risk of chronic kidney disease progression and mortality in patients at risk of cardiovascular events in type 2 and CKD. The DFM, which is dependence forming medication and opioid clinical reviews. Again, as we know, these are also of topical importance. And these reviews not only enable us to make sure that we are safely prescribing, but also that we are we are working according to guidance when these patients medications are being withdrawn as well. And I do know that there are work streams tasked with this within the wider NEL group to develop guidance in accordance with national guidelines. It also ensures that we align with PC and DES requirements, such as the green inhaler prescribing, which, as we know, is part of one of the NHS plans to ensure that not only do we improve respiratory outcomes in those patients, but also reduce the environmental impact of metered dose inhalers. And of course, to ensure that there's cost-effective prescribing, which is the QUIP element of the scheme. And this is to make sure that we are prescribing appropriately and cost-effectively. So medicines, as we know, are the most frequently used healthcare interventions in the NHS. And while we can make efficiency savings to help with the cost pressures, the significant cost pressures within the NHS, this will go a long way towards reducing the funding gap. And so we do know that the effective working of the parts contributes to the whole. So it's very important that we ensure that we do this as well. And I think the last slide basically just, if we go on to the last slide, please. Or the next slide. And so this basically just summarizes some of the things that I think Rosalie has already mentioned. So I think the good thing to know is that, of course, we're not completely starting from scratch. So there is already some familiarity within the scheme. Some of the areas included are similar to what we've worked on previously in the past. So it's basically a case of business as usual. And because this is the first year this is being implemented, I think the learning and the outcomes from this would help to shape the future prescribing schemes. As Rosalia mentioned earlier, because we're starting a bit later in the year, it's a 7-month scheme, and to reflect that, the submissions have been reduced so that this would not be too onerous on practices. But of course, the practice medicine optimization teams will still monitor practice achievements. So the deadline for most of them would be end of March next year. And the ask is that practices should start planning ahead in order to meet those deadlines. The second part of the scheme, which is the prescribing efficiency scheme rather, has no submission required and is essentially the quick part of the scheme. And I think that's pretty much it from me. Apologies
Fantastic.
again for the slight hiccup at the beginning.
Fantastic, that's fine. Thank you so much, Dr. Afonso. Right, so I'm going to take back over and I'm going to go through the scheme outline with you. So the nuts and bolts of it, so in a little bit more detail. So the first part of it is, like I said, to formalise the elements that we've done already, and it does include the practice visit. So your prescribing advisors has or will be reaching out to practices to arrange visits. So the visits may be at either a practice or a PCN level, and they will encompass a prescribing review that looks at last year's prescribing, performance against last year's scheme, and any other key pertinent points that need to be picked up. And as part of this, you'll be asked to agree on one area to work on in year. And this needs to be agreed with your prescribing advisor and separate and different to what is included in this scheme already. So it could be a simple thing such as high quantities of drugs or semaglutide, for instance, if this is a particular issue for your practice. So the second area is to engage inter-patient campaigns. We know many practices have been doing this already. So we're really just including it to encourage and to make everyone take part. We've chosen two particular areas, so that's medicines waste and the greener inhaler campaign. And participation can include simple things and small things such as putting a poster in the waiting room or having leaflets or a patient group discussion, and practices just need to declare that they've taken part into this. And then the last bit that we'd like to formalise is the regular meetings that we know you've been having already with your community pharmacists. And they know they play an important part of our health community, and it's really important that we continue to foster and to build those relationships. So we've provided, or we will provide some templates that which you can use, such as agenda items and minute templates, but of course it's up to practices to amend how best to use them for individually. So the second area, so now we're getting into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty, is the engaging with the prescribing decision support system. So as Rosalia has said, we've had a bit of a change this year. So a lot of PCNs and practices were using Script Switch previously, and we've now all come on board with Optimize RX. So it does work a bit similar to Script Switch, and as part of this, we are asking practices to meet an acceptance rate of at least 20%. So you will get messages and you will also get data in terms of your performance on a monthly basis. And as Rosalia has said, there is a feedback button similar to how you had in Script Switch, so you can make suggestions or let us know where messages are inappropriate. So the next area as part of the clinical one is looking at hospital only and specials. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is something that you've been doing already. You'll continue to get information on your practice level hospital and special only drugs that have been prescribed. And we're asking practices to demonstrate a 10% reduction in both of these areas. If, for instance, there is it comes about where you have been unable to meet this reduction and meeting the target, however, you have reviewed the patient, but for whatever clinical reason you've not been able to stop or anything, then we are asking practices to submit the summary of the reviews to identify the work that you've been doing. The other area is looking at antimicrobials. So again, we've continued to use volume and the broad spectrum antibiotics. And you will know that the reason for the inclusion here is because during the pandemic, we saw quite an increase. This has been coming down, but we're not quite there yet in terms of pre-COVID levels. And we've also got a new indicator. And this one it's the duration of antibiotics, or particularly amoxicillin, from 7 days down to 5 days. So this is only really new for the scheme. It's still a message that we have had in our guidelines and in the national guidelines. And you'll find our local guidelines on our portal as well. But we've included it as an indicator to try to get practices to focus their minds to it. So because it's a new indicator, we have staggered the payments for it, and we've got a lower threshold and a higher threshold that practices can meet. So if practices demonstrate that they have been able to move a little bit, there is a remuneration for that. So now coming a bit more onto the clinical reviews. So we've got 2 clinical reviews that we'd like practices to undertake. So the first one is looking at SGLT2s in patients with either type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease. So you will know that this matches the NICE guidance that came out, and also the updates to our NEL-wide diabetes guidelines. And again, you'll be able to find this on the portal. So the review is really to identify patients and to support practices to gain confidence in considering, reviewing and starting this agent. We've also got tools to help support such as search tools, searches and audit tools as well. And for the purposes of the PQESS, sorry, this is the acronym which I'm going to be using for our scheme, we want to see a minimum of 30 patients reviewed and an action plan of how you're going to ensure that the remainder patients who fit the criteria are initiated or at least are considered for this agent. So the second area, and as Dr. Fufunso has mentioned, is the dependency forming medications. So we know practices have started some of the work already, so you'll be familiar with reviewing high dose opioids, for instance. However, it does include the wider agents such as the hypnotics and the antidepressants, and we're trying to include this a little bit more. And it's really just to try and raise awareness in practices and PCNs and ensure it's on their agenda for patients who require a clinical review. So for the purposes of the scheme, we want to see, again, a minimum of 30 patients reviewed, and they can be from either one of these 3 subgroups or a combination of. So if, for instance, you're a practice where you've still got an issue of high-dose opioids, we would encourage you to focus on these patient groups and then make up the remaining patients, minimum patients, from the other 2 subgroups. So one of the areas is looking at where opioids are prescribed, however, where NICE gives alternative treatments that could be used. And that includes the indications of osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis and back pain, and you've got the NICE guidelines there. And then the third area is looking at where patients have been prescribed opioids and co-prescribed other DFM medications. And again, we'll have tools and audit tools and search tools to support practices with this. So as I've mentioned, we will be having an education session, which the team will host for practices. It's going to be towards the end of this calendar year, and it'll be no more than 2 hours in duration. And the areas that are to be covered will be the SGLT2, antibiotics. So as you can see, that coincides and supports the areas included in the scheme, and also nutrition. So from this, what we'd like to see practices do is submit an action plan in terms of the learning points and, more importantly, how they're going to utilize this for the benefit of their patients. The session is going to be a recorded one, so if there are practices or pharmacists who aren't able to attend, then we would encourage them to review the video, but we would encourage as much as possible for each of the practices to attend this session, please, because then you can get the benefit of asking questions with our speakers. Part E focuses on medication safety. So again, as Dr. Fufunso has stated, we've now got this platform, the learning from patient safety events, and we're really encouraging practices to submit at least one medication event. Can be a near miss, but it's really about supporting the learning that can come from that. I'm happy to say that actually the medicines team this year now have access to this database, so you won't need to send us a copy of your alert. If you record it on the system, we will be able to have access for it. And this is really important so that the ICB can have a bird's eye view in terms of the scheme, or the incidences that are coming through, and this will help to identify any areas that we may need to support or require further development. We do have a SOP to support practices in case they're not familiar with the platform, and you can always come to your borough teams as well. So the other area that we'd like as part of the medication safety is for practices to have a policy, which you should be having already anyway, in terms of how you manage MHRA alerts. We're not asking you to submit your policy, but more of a declaration that you have a policy on board, and actually it's real opportune time to review this policy and make any updates. And then if you do make updates, just to summarize those. And the final area that that is covered within this section is the actioning of the MHRA alert for valproate. So we'd like practices to submit evidence that they have completed the alert. There are tools to support you, such as the Eclipse tool, and that will help you to identify patients who require review, so that you can action and implement the alert. Again, we do have resources to help support that and templates for submissions. So this, I know it might not be very clear at the moment, but it's just to highlight and to summarize. What we've done is a bit of a summary shot so that you can see all the different areas of the scheme, what is required of you, whether it's a submission or a target, and the points that are allocated to each part of the scheme and the deadline for when it is reviewing. Thank you very much indeed. I will now hand over to my colleague, Catty. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin. I'm just going to summarize my section briefly because I'm aware of time. So the slide that's showing now maps the PQESS requirements that align with NHS England's medicines optimisation key priorities for this year. These key priority areas will be familiar with practices because these are areas that we have focused on in the past. So they're pretty much business as usual. So some of the examples include valproate safety in females of childbearing age, reducing problematic polypharmacy, promoting cost-effective prescribing, as well as increasing the uptake of green inhalers. So next slide, please. So as this is our first nail-wide scheme, we've had to undertake quite extensive consultation with our key local stakeholders. So example of those that we've consulted with includes the LMCs across NEL, the primary care senior management team, the LPC, and this process has taken quite a considerable amount of time. So we received a considerable amount of feedback from these stakeholders, mostly that there were too many requirements. So we've considered the shortened timeline to complete the asks of the scheme, and therefore we've streamlined the scheme. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. Next slide again. So this slide essentially shows the amendments that we've made post feedback from our stakeholders. So we've removed the requirements for practices to complete a clinical review looking at the prescribing of antipsychotics in dementia patients. We've also removed the requirements to achieve a specific target for reviewing Eclipse live alerts. But we still would encourage practices to engage with the system as it is a useful tool to support your clinical reviews. We've also removed the submission requirements for the entry criteria, but we ask that practices do a self-declaration to the medicines optimization team that they've actually completed this specific ask. We've now suggested for the MHR alert section that practices only respond to one alert, so that's the valproate one. If you don't have patients on valproate, then the requirement is for practices to respond to an alternative alert. So that's it in a nutshell. I will now hand over to Imran, who will now cover the efficiency part of the scheme.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So as mentioned, we've also got an efficiency scheme part. So next slide, and this will cover three main areas. Next slide. This will cover the prescribing of ICS LABA and LAMA in patients, cost-effective ICS LABA preparations, and cost-effective prescribing of selected opioids, namely oxycodone and buprenorphine. There'll be no submissions. This is all going to be monitored via EPACT. Q4 will be used as a baseline because we are running behind in the scheme. Normally we use Q3, and we'll be judging it with Q4 next year. Next slide. Okay. Brilliant. So we've already given you a synopsis of the prescribing efficiencies that we need to achieve, which is about £17 million. So this is hopefully going to contribute towards some of that £17 million. The whole PQESS scheme itself is funded actually through the savings. So this, and you will have seen majority of this year's scheme is actually based more around safety, quality than it is about efficiencies. So we're using those savings to help pay for the prescribing quality scheme. Next slide. So to get into a bit more detail around what the ask is, some key pointers. The payment is going to be 26p per registered patient, and in the previous slide you saw we were again allocating 100 points for all three, and I'll show you what the split is between the three targets in a second. Next slide. So the three areas, as I said, the first one is prescribing where you've got patients on an ICS LABA and a LAMA, is to consider using one of our triple therapy inhalers. Now, there are some real benefits in doing this, one especially for the patient, because there's one inhaler instead of using two inhalers. Often they might have an MDI and a DPI. This will take some of the, it just makes it easier. I've already been doing this prior to the launch of this scheme, and touch wood, you know, I've had some good success with patients that have gone on to triple therapy. It's also a time to actually consider whether the treatment is appropriate. In COPD, certainly, I don't see too much step down. Normally, it's always a step up, but there may be an ACOS patient or an asthma patient, possibly, where you may actually be able to step down as well. So this one, I think, is not just cost saving, it is actually really good in terms of patient benefit as well. The second one is about the cost-effective prescribing of ICS LABAs. So we're preferring, obviously, to go to a greener option, which is a DPI inhaler. However, that's not always going to be the case. If the patient hasn't got enough inspiratory, effort, then we would still prefer a cost-effective MDI. And I think somebody's put in the chat about Clenil going to Soprobec, that it's a different color. And yes, we don't expect this to be a blanket switch. You know, you do a search and just switch everybody over. Ideally, you'll be reviewing your patients at their annual asthma review. That's a good time to do this. Some of you will be doing it face to face. Some may just need a telephone consultation, and it can be done from there as well. So yeah, not a blanket switch, but you know, speak to the patients. Obviously, we need to do that. And the third one is about prescribing cost-effective brands for buprenorphine patch and oxycodone modified release tablets and immediate release capsules. So there are, apart from the cost benefits, there are actually advantages to this. There have been a number of medication errors where, you know, you've got so many different brands of oxycodone now, and there are a lot more brands for buprenorphine that are on the market as well. It was easy back in my day, you just had Butrans and that was the end of it. But now with so many brands, there have been errors, prescribing errors, dispensing errors. And I think if the patient getting one particular brand will hopefully start to reduce those errors. And obviously we've got the cost efficiency side of it helping us as well. So those are the three areas, and the targets are there. So we're looking at a 50% of patients who have gone an ICS LAMA to be prescribed a trilogy, a Trimbo, something like that, or to be stepped down. We're looking at a 60% for the branded ICS LABA switch and 70% for the buprenorphine and oxycodone. Somebody's mentioned there's a huge problem with brands of oxycodone and buprenorphine. Hopefully the ones that we're asking you to do are not the ones that are the problem. So fingers crossed on that. If there is a problem, let us know. But that essentially is the efficiency part of the scheme. Next slide. So what's the formulary alternative for oxycodone? So, you know, you need to have a proper pain review. If they're on oxycodone, can they be switched over to a different opioid? This isn't straightforward. You know, okay, we'll stop that and we'll start this. They need to have a proper review. Are there North East London guidelines on COPD asthma? Yes, there is. There's a new respiratory guidelines have been produced, and they will have the formulary choices on them. So this slide I've already covered the benefits, the health benefits, if you like, from the efficiency side of the scheme as well. So hopefully you hit two birds with one stone, efficiencies and better off for the patient as well. I realize need for a proper review, but what the preferred formulary choices, we will get those out. The formulary choices will be on the new website because all the respiratory guidelines are going to be on there, but also you can discuss them with your prescribing advisor. They'll be able to guide you on that. Yeah.
Sorry, Imran.
Yeah.
You said that the new website, has that been launched? Is that available?
It is launched. It's I've been on it. So hopefully it should be there. And somebody's just put up the links, I think.
Okay, and everything's already on there.
Yeah, the respiratory guidelines were actually agreed about 3, 4, 5 months ago, maybe even a bit longer than that. So yes, it should all be on there.
So we don't use the old medicines management.
It's
anymore.
Yeah, I think that stopped at the end of August, if I'm not wrong.
I'm still using that one, so that's fine.
Okay, the new stuff should also be on that as well, but it should have all been migrated over to the new one. So if any of my colleagues are on and have got the link for the new website, if you can cut and paste it in, I'd really appreciate it. If you've got 0 hospital only and 0 specials, well then it's brilliant. You've got very little to do, haven't you? That won't be a problem.
Hello?
Yeah. And
I'm still doing this PQESS launch.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 2:30.
Okay. And I'm going to be having my lunch at 2:30. I don't know what anybody else is doing. Right. Any other questions? Right. Any difference between Optimize RX and Script Switch? No. I actually like the Optimize RX one a bit better for some reason. It just seems to be a little bit clearer to me. It does ask you, so if I've rejected a proposed switch from Optimize RX, it does ask you, well, why? Majority of the time, I just, you know, if I'm rushed or whatever, or there's, I can bypass that just by clicking the button. But I do like to give feedback on some of the switches where perhaps I haven't wanted to. So as a typical example, I was asked, you know, do I really want, I know it's out of stock at the moment, but glycoside MR 30 milligram to 40 milligram, but I didn't want to because I had a particular reason for doing it. So yeah, it's.
Thank you, Imran. That's great. And I wondered whether on the back of that, Dr. Fonso, as a GP that's used Optimize RX, if you can cast your mind back to when you had Script Switch, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of using Optimize RX over when you used to use script switch. Sorry to put you on the spot, and you might not remember because you've been using OptimizeRx for some years now. Thank you.
No, it's fine. And I think just to add to what Imran said, I think it's the quality of the information that it gives as well. I think it gives certainly gives more information than when we used to use script switch. So we have certainly found it quite useful and much better than script switch when we were using script switch at the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've got a couple of hands up, so I'll just bring in those who've got their hands up. Emma, did you want to raise a question?
Yes, I had a couple of questions actually, thanks. I mean, the first actually is to say, I know that you say that it's been reduced from what you originally planned, but it still seems to me very similar to last year's MOS for Tower Hamlets at least, which included attendance at some education sessions, a review on dependence forming drugs, a review on diabetes medication, a review of respiratory stuff, doing specials and hospital only drugs, and doing script switch, and doing an alert. So I can't quite see any reduction for Tower Hamlets in with the workload involved. We've only got 6 months to do this in.
Just to say that we can certainly the medicines optimization pharmacists that oversee your practice can pick some of that up. We definitely had a significant reduction in areas. So I think the slide, which will also be shared after the meeting, Katia went through this, but we definitely took out a couple of reviews. Things like MHRA are pieces of work that practices would be expected to do routinely. I think for the purposes of the scheme, it was to evidence to say that yes, you do have a process of implementing this. Sodium valproate has been a request for several years. So those act as more as reminders for practices.
I wasn't thinking more of that because we do that anyway. I was more thinking of the whatever it's called, the LFPSE or whatever it's called. So basically, the number of things that we've got to do this year is the same as the number of things that we had to do last year. That's all. That's the point I'm just trying to make for Tower Hamlets. I'm sure it's less than what you originally planned, but it's the same as it was for last year for Tower Hamlets.
Okay, I don't know the Tower Hamlets scheme inside out but certainly we took on recommendations from LMCs that represented Tower Hamlets as well. And I think with the final product, they did agree that there was a reduction in what we had originally proposed. I'm happy for the medicines optimization pharmacist who covers your PCN to perhaps take that into further detail with you as well.
Sure. I mean, it's not going to change anything at this point. I just want to give the feedback. For Tower Hamlets, it's the same. We've now got 12 months work in 6 months. The questions that I had were for with the script switch and the hospitals and specials. Where are we going to get that data? We used to get it on the old Tower Hamlets intranet, and I can't see it on the new intranet. Yasmin's nodding her head. Does that mean it's going to be on the new intranet?
Yes, sorry, Emma. It means it will be on the new portal.
And will it be something?
And I think Katie responded to that in the chat as well to say that it was going to be on the intranet.
Will it be sent to us as well, or we just need to make sure we check it on the intranet?
It will be on the portal, hosted for everybody.
On the portal. Okay. The other comment I had about the specials and hospital, particularly if we've got to achieve a reduction, given that we've been doing this for years, especially in our practice, we've got a very small number of specials that continue to be some things that we can't stop because we've got a small number of very, very unwell children who are going to be alive for a long time. We have fed this back every year before. It's hard to achieve a reduction if you're already doing as best you can.
Yes, I can answer that. You're absolutely spot on. There are certain specials which we have absolutely no choice. So what we have said in the scheme is either a reduction or a review. So we've got a template for that, a review of your patients where you've had a look and you've said, this patient absolutely needs that special. And that's absolutely fine. So you won't get penalized for that. What happens though is over time we all do this. These specials come in, and we just carry on with it. And there are certainly because I used to work in a hospice, so I know a lot about these specials for those kids. They are absolutely appropriate, but there are also instances where we can actually make a change.
Yeah, the next question I had was about the cost-effective bit, the bit about the inhalers and the opioids. Where will we be able to see that data so that we can see how we're doing?
You will get monthly scorecards, which will show you where you are with each of your targets. So and they will also be available on the website, I think, as well. So, and also via your prescribing advisor, they will certainly be able to help you with those.
Great.
And just to add that there will be crib sheets about which products we're recommending over others. For the interest of time, can I move to bring in Dr. Shah, Dr. Ambrish Shah, who's had his or her hand up for a little while. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, not at all. Thanks, Imran, for the presentation. The question I wanted to ask, I think, has already been put on the chat at 1353 by Billet Lane Medical Practice. Now, this is about inhalers or some other items. When Optimize RX offers you a choice, and when you adopt the choices, ask you to enter the dose. And then if you go back to check the dose on the previous formulation, it automatically accepts the previous formulation by default. So you're not able to choose, and you don't know beforehand which items is going to ask you for that information for.
Imran, would you like me to bring Sanjay in to help respond to this question? Sanjay is our head of medicines optimization, leading on respiratory issues. Sanjay, are you still on the call?
I am. Sorry, I kind of picked up that message. So I'm just wondering if we can take this offline, Dr. Shah, and I can get some details on it. It may just be the way that the message has been set up. So I just need to make sure and understand what that looks like. And we can make an amendment to that message if that's the case, because clearly we want it to make it as easy as possible for you when accepting those messages.
Okay, I'll give an example, Sanjay, a simple one. Take Clenil inhaler.
Yeah.
I think Optimize RX is currently asking you to switch to Sporobax or something? Something like that? Yeah. Now, it doesn't convert the dose directly. It asks you to re-enter the dose. And if you then go back to Clenil to check the dose that patient was on, it will automatically accept Clenil. Then you can't go back to Sporobax to change it. So by default, it will pick up the previous product the patient was already on.
Okay, I'm going to pick this up with the product team at Optimize RX and see what's happening, because that shouldn't be happening, but I need to understand that.
I hope I'm making sense to you.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. So let me go back to the team and we'll look into that.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just raise, but just to quickly on this one, I just did the prescription for exactly the same thing. It did not take Clenil off from the patient repeat. It kept the Clenil on the repeat and issued the new Sporobax on repeat. So ideally, when you're replacing a product, you're removing the old product in the past and starting the new one. That makes sense, yes?
Yes, it does. It does.
Yeah, so I can pick that up with the technical team as well, because I mean that wouldn't just be Sporobax, that would be across anything that we're accepting changes for. So let me see what they come back with, and we can get a response on that.
Thank you, Sanjay.
And another thing, Sanjay, sorry to come in.
That's right.
Sometimes it's asking you to change Ramipril capsule to tablets, and sometimes asking you to change tablet to capsules. It's done both.
Oh, so that might be on price, because I think the way some of the messages work is if there's a differential in the price, I think it amends the way the message is based on the drug tariff price.
But I mean, does that happen on month-to-month basis, or how does it?
I can find out. So certainly, I don't think it should happen on a month-to-month basis, because it doesn't normally fluctuate quite like that. But I can check again.
Okay.
Okay, Dr. Shah, just for the purpose of time, if you've got other queries, we're going to put the queries email contacts in the chat, if you could use it. Can I take just one question from Farhana, who's saying just the one for interest of time, and then I'll come to Dr. Wright, and then I won't take any more questions. But please do know that we do have contact details that you can contact us with any further questions. But just one question, your most important question, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to clarify, actually, because I'm in Newham as well. I think the work seems pretty much the same as what we did last year, but I think this year there is an extra part, if I'm not mistaken, and is that the prescribing efficiency scheme, and this is an add-on to the original scheme. So this we get 24 pence per patient for doing the extra points.
I'm not familiar with previous NUM schemes, but I'm familiar with that generally all incentive schemes tend to have a requirement to make some efficiency savings. In addition, our finance required for the investments to incentivize practices for doing this work, that there would need to be delivery of savings. I'm not quite sure if you joined at the beginning when I talked about some of our financial positions, but having an element of efficiency delivering savings is typically linked with most incentive schemes. So perhaps it's in a different sort of way. It's not linked to the detail of a kind of review, etc. But delivery of efficiencies has always typically, in the kind of 2 decades that I've worked in prescribing advisory roles, has been linked to schemes. I'll ask the prescribing advisors who are leading on NUM PCNs to discuss this in detail with your practice. So do email us as well.
Farhana, just to say that actually the savings elements that we've done previously in TNW have been incorporated as part of the clinical elements and the clinical reviews. So I think really the difference this time is it's a little bit clearer and a bit more overt to probably what you've been used to for the last few years in TNW. But this year it's just a bit clearer and separated.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that, because I think the second part of it, where it's separated now, and it's saying a minimum of 50% of a reduction of some inhalers. I think that will be quite tough to do for most of us, really, in the 6 months.
Okay, we'll pick the practice visits. Imran, go on.
Yeah, but there is actually, we appreciate that. So there is actually payment from baseline up to that target. So even if you don't manage to hit 50%, you will get some money for making some improvement. So we acknowledge that.
Imran, can I just come in on this just very quickly? So just our baseline data, the practice with the most patients that are eligible for this, I think only had, I'm going to say 200 patients, and there's a fairly big list size practice, I think 23,000. I think a majority of practices have got less than 50 patients identified. So actually we could, we should be able to manage that, but that's all in the baseline data pack that will be posted out onto the portal. You'll be able to see that.
Thank you, Sanjay. So very last question from Dr. Wright, and then we have to close, unfortunately. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, just a quick one about the optimize suggested switches. When it suggests an option to use, are they dose equivalent? Because I think Clenil used to be half the dose of beclomethasone or something, but if they're dose equivalent, then we can just use original dosing and frequency in regards to somebody's previous question.
And the Soprobec and Clenil are identical, so they're bioequivalent.
So then we could you can use original dose, whatever you were using for Clenil. You don't have to amend the dose. I think the other doctor was querying that, but we'd need to know they were bioequivalent.
Yeah, so I think the switches on there will only be where they're bioequivalent, because that's why I don't think we've included QVAR in this.
Thank you, that's answered, but they're bioequivalent. Thank you.
That's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So very sort of busy question and answer in the chat, and also in the question and answers. And I apologies for my poor chairing, because we've gone a few minutes over our scheduled 1 hour. Again, thank you very much for everyone for attending today. You should have had yesterday emailed to your practice the detail of this scheme. You will also have your medicines optimization pharmacy team contacting you with regards to prescribing visits. So please do respond to these as soon as you can. There's also some contact details provided in the chats by the team, Yasmin, Imran, and Kati. So please do contact us if you need any further information, or if you had a question that you feel wasn't clarified today. I appreciate all your efforts. I know it's really sort of difficult, challenging time in general practice. So we continue to be appreciative of all your support in terms of your prescribing and your standards of prescribing, efforts that you make around efficiencies, etc. Again, I would like to thank the team, including Dr. Fofonso, Yasmin, Imran, Kati, and Sanjay, helping us to respond to questions around respiratory. Really appreciate all your efforts. And thank you very much once again for being here today. Any last questions or comments from Kati, Yasmin, or Imran, please? No? Okay.
Could I just quickly make a plea for next year? Could it start in April? If it takes time, could it?
Yes, it will do.
Yes, we aimed to, but in the introduction, I explained some of the organizational issues that led to this, but we aim to do that. Thank you so very much for your time, and take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, was
Can
there
we
a
stop
time
recording,
when
please?